So a couple of things that were on the panel, which by the way, Carla knocked out of the park and her panelists, thank you very much. Speak at the civic and social clubs. In the SCCA thing that I did yesterday, I did a 10-minute talk about street survival wearing my polo. And there was a judge there, and the judge ended up asking me to come to his chambers that next Tuesday, and I started getting court-appointed kids to attend my school. They had to come and do a street survival school before they get the points off their license. That year I did 8 street survival schools. That also got the city in my back pocket. And the week before one of my schools, I actually lost the site. The councilman in that area heard that, picked up the phone to an owner in a shopping mall that was vacant, and my SCCA region got back in on that site with the vacant lot at the shopping mall in 24 hours. Speaking at those social and civic clubs, they are full of politicians. They are full of judges. Use that. Speak that. All right, Bill. This next one's special needs. I've had a special needs student before. It's very interesting. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. So many of us have had situations where we've had a student that needed some additional help to have a successful day. Some of that can be because of physical limitations. Some of it, the challenges can be developmental, behavioral limitations. Sometimes these are known before the school. You'll have a parent that says, "Hey, just to let you know, my son's on the spectrum. He's going to need a little bit extra time, this or that or whatever." Many times it's not known before. So this presentation is going to give you some background that hopefully you can be a little more aware, a little more empathetic, a little more knowledgeable about this situation, and get you thinking in a direction that's going to give you some more success. This has never been written down before. It's not cast in stone in bronze over the foundation's office door or anything, but it's a basic principle, I think, that everybody can agree to. If a student's able to get a driver's license or in the process of getting a driver's license, we ought to be able to teach them how to drive better. Okay? There are teenagers out there that have no business being behind the wheel of a car for various reasons. All right, so I'm not saying everybody should be driving, but I'm saying if they can legally do that, then we shouldn't be turning them away or creating any roadblocks for them to do that. I got with Dr. Laura Stith from the Child Focus group in Cincinnati, Ohio, through a connection with Tim Bichek. Tim and I sat down. She is a behavioral psychologist that is specializing in autism and ADHD. So I am in no means an expert in this area, all right? I've gone down the rabbit hole of the internet a couple times developing this slide deck. This is the first time it's ever been presented, so I have to read a lot of the notes here. I'm breaking every cardinal rule of PowerPoint yet again. There's tons of words on this slide. But the way that we're recording this with the 14 cameras that are around the room, this is something that you'll be able to go back in, slow it down a little bit, pause on some of the slides, read some of the screens better, because I've got 30 minutes to present an hour's worth of material. The best place to start is really to prevent the issues in the first place. The backstory of a lot of this started with one of Carla's schools a long, long time ago. I was still working as an architect at the time, is how long it was, and I get a phone call from a parent saying, I want to just be sure that you're going to have the accommodations that my son needs. And I said, okay, what school are you talking about in the first place? And then what are his needs? And she said, well, he's deaf. At that time, we had no vehicle to give that kind of information other than a parent going, hey, I got a deaf kid and I want him to bring to your school. This was on Tuesday, Wednesday of a Saturday school. Long story short, we got it covered, but it was crazy. So at that point, we added a question in the registration process. Does your child have, or does your teen have any physical limitations that we need to be aware of? Something pretty generic. So we have changed that. And Brian with Motorsport Reg literally was sitting in the back of the room yesterday changing everybody's sandbox. And now I've got to go through in everybody's sandbox and flip a couple more switches. But we've added these two questions to everybody's registration page. Does the student have any medical or physical conditions that would require special accommodations that the organizers need to be aware of? Okay, so if they're physically handicapped, can't do steps, use hand controls in the car, anything like that, that's what that question's really more geared for. So you can start to plan and make some whatever special accommodations you need for that. The bottom one is a little bit more what I'm going to spend most of the time of this talking about, is has your student been diagnosed with ADHD, autism, anxiety, or any other condition that the organizers need to be aware of? If so, please explain. Okay? So, when that kicks in, it's really good to have that information first. There are a percentage of parents out there, let's just easily say that don't want you to know that because they don't want special accommodations for their kid, even though he really needs it, because that's not the way they want to raise their child. They want them to be mainstreamed into life just like everybody else. And you got to deal with it just like they would at a grocery store or at McDonald's or at whatever that they're going to do. You just got to be ready. There's no secrets there. Okay? So, the other part of the prevention of this is the reminder email that you all send out, right? Okay? This is a very, very important email. You've got to send that out. Carla sends it out about 2 weeks in advance. There are people maybe in this room, I don't remember names, but somebody has told me, well, I don't send it out until the Wednesday night before. That's way, 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 way too late, okay? But in that reminder email, and we can help you with some boilerplate language if you want to, but basically, again, ask, is there any accommodations we need to be made aware of? Okay? Also, remind them in there, please be sure you get enough sleep. Your student gets enough sleep. Please be sure they get something to eat. Please be sure they take any needed medication. Okay? There's a lot of medication, a lot of medicated teens out there that for some reason Saturday morning they're scrambling, they're getting up, they're getting ready to go, and oh yeah, they forgot to take that. And by the end of the day, they are bouncing off the walls. Okay? So that's very important. So, ADHD, what are we talking about here? It's a medical condition. Okay? A person with ADHD has a different in brain development. Some of it affects how they can sit still. Some of it affects self-control, attention, focus, all of that. I have a son that has ADHD. He was diagnosed really, really early with ADHD. The little Johnny jump up things that you put on your door frame, that was his favorite toy. Okay? That's the only way we got him to go to take a nap, was just put him in that thing and walk away for a while. And finally it would slow down enough and he would just kind of crash and you could maybe lift him out and lay him down. All right? So it affects people at work, at home, at school, friendships, all of that. It's going to affect them in the car, okay? But it's also going to affect them in your classroom. And that's what we're going to try to talk about a little bit here. Just background stuff. I'm going to go through these pretty quick because there's more important stuff coming. But the 42% increase over the last 8 years, okay? More kids are being diagnosed with ADHD than they have been before. All right? So, some of us are familiar with ADHD, some of us are more familiar with the term ADD, okay, attention deficit disorder. ADD is really an old term. Sorry, I got to go back, get my note there. ADD is really an old term. It's now under the umbrella of ADHD. It's not necessarily just paying attention. Problems more paying attention and not just hyperactive. All right, so don't say ADD anymore. It's all ADHD. So 1 in 10 receive this diagnosis. Boys are 2 to 3 times more likely to receive the diagnosis than girls. A lot of that is because the boys will get more frustrated with that and act out more, where the girls have a little bit more control in that area, and just the one article I read, they just talk more. They don't necessarily act out, okay? So that's a fairly typical classroom picture or event picture, right? But remember, 1 in 10. So which one is it? You're not really going to be able to tell, okay? Just by looking at them as they're coming in the morning registration. Usually when you get them sitting down in the classroom for the first time, that's when you'll start to get a little bit of more information on that. And it's not just a kid thing. This is following into adulthood. My son is now 26. He still takes medication for it. Okay? So it's not just an 8-year-old. It can still be an 18-year-old. More than likely, it'll still be a 28-year-old. Treatment's important. The medication's important. That's why it's important to remind them. Hey, so here are some kind of the 9 major symptoms that we're going to be involved with. This list went on to almost 20, but I kind of culled it out because some of it really doesn't pertain to us. But obviously, interrupting, waiting their turn, fidgetedness, I knew I was going to stumble on that one, lack of focus, daydreaming, all that kind of stuff you're going to see in the classroom and in the car. Okay? So if you're hearing this information coming from a parent, if it's on the registration page when you're downloading a roster and you can see that, if you've got time, and I know you're going to laugh, if you've got time, call the parent and talk to them and just try to get some information on how they've approached this raising their teen, because they really need to have a conversation about the risk of driving with ADHD due to the core symptoms, as it says, of inattention, distractibility, and impulsivity. There's a lot of illities there. The responsibility of them driving really can't be taken lightly. A lot of why I wanted to do this also is I have a very dear friend that has a son that's autistic, very high-functioning autistic, but she said, can you help us train him how to drive? And I was like, holy crap, yes, I can, but I was panicked. They took him out in a big parking lot, got him behind the wheel, spent about a half an hour with him, and then went, yeah, that's not going to work. So I wasn't having to do that. But that's what got me interested in a lot of this, and I've been trying to do some research for it. Okay? Surprisingly, a manual transmission is good for a student with ADHD. All right? It gives their bodies something to do as they're driving. It makes them focus on what they're doing more. My wife's a high school teacher. She's taught elementary and high school. In elementary school, she had an exercise bike in the corner of her room. And there was always a couple kids in her class that just needed to go ride the bike while they were reading. So they would get on the bike and just start pedaling. And as long as they were moving that bicycle, they could read. If you made them sit in a chair to read, they couldn't do it. Okay? So the manual transmission thing is it makes sense once you think about it, but it's not a very logical step there. So that's good information to give to a parent if you're able to talk to them on the phone beforehand. So when you've got a student with ADHD in the car, you got to think about the behind the wheel portion might need to be adjusted a little bit to keep the nerves in check, because this can also have a lot of anxiety tied to it, right? So if you're running a stations circuit, you might need to do a couple more rotations on that one exercise before they'll actually finally get it. I've had coaches talk about, well, I couldn't talk to my student while they were driving because it freaked them out. Because they were thinking I was yelling at them. They would put their fingers up to their ears. They would do all kinds of stuff. So I had to let them do the slalom and then pull them over to the side and go, okay, now, last time you did it this way, this time I want you to do it this way a little bit more. So that just takes some extra time, okay? Try to talk to them about what their fears really are. And are they perceiving the risk accurately? That list up there is the CDC's 8 danger zones. The bottom line there is they're saying most anxious teens avoid everything after 2. All right? So you just need to call out the driver's experience. Hey, this is going to get better. Let's keep working on this. You're going to be fine, because they have to get over that anxiety level. You need to give them very clear, concise instructions. All right? If you've done the BMW Club's high performance driving trainer school, that should be very common language for you. Clear, concise instructions. That doesn't mean, all right, now you're fixing to come up here and take a right-hand turn. You just need to say turn right, brake here. Okay? Very clear, concise verbiage. And have them repeat it back to you, because you're talking, they're hearing, but they might not be listening. Okay? And there's 2 differences there. The instructor needs to keep a kind of third eye directly on them, not only what they're doing and what else is going on, but notice when they're zoning out a little bit or distracted by something else. I had an instructor give me a great phrase. It's not that they can't see the forest because of the trees. They can only see the tree and they don't recognize the forest. They can get very hyper-focused on one thing and not see a whole bunch of other. And hopefully that's something about driving. But it could also be, wow, that color blue on the Portacan is really cool. You just don't know. Okay? Make sure that they're using active scanning. They're going to hear about scanning in the classroom, but make sure they're not just hyper-focused on one thing ahead of you. Have them narrate decisions as they're driving. Now I'm pushing on the pedal a little harder. Now I have to turn a little bit more. Now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that. Have them narrate that back to you. Visualization apparently works really well with ADHD students. Okay? So have them think about, close their eyes, have them think about what the exercise is and visualize what they're going to do before they do it. All of this takes time. I recognize that. Okay? But this is what's important to make this student successful. The bottom line there is it always kind of makes me chuckle is be sure they're breathing. Okay? If you're a high-performance driving instructor, you're used to having students hold their breath as they're going through the tricky part of a corner on the track. Okay? These guys can do the same thing. They get overwhelmed, they start to hold their breath. Okay? So just make sure they're taking really good, deep breaths, not, real quick, little short, repetitive ones. Let the teen know that you're there to help them, that you're there to protect them, that nothing bad's going to happen if they do this, if they do that. Hey, are you getting overwhelmed? Let's just pull out a line for a little bit. Let's go over here and just chillax, okay? Yeah, they're going to miss a couple rotations, but the more that they start feeding their anxiety, the more it's going to build. So if you take them out of that arena that they're going to not be so anxious about, it'll help it go away, okay? The anxiety won't go away if they don't try to make it go away. If they let it just build on itself, it's going to get worse and worse. Okay? You encourage them to practice a lot. Okay? If the teen's waiting for the anxiety to go away, like I just said, it won't go away. Prepare them for their driving after they leave for the day. Okay? Have them think about things that they're going to do when they're on their own in the car. Okay? Keep the music at a low level while the car is stationary before they put it in gear. Have them put their playlist on or whatever and just say, you can't touch that after you start driving. You got to leave it alone. They can't go looking for their phone for a song on Spotify. Okay? Keep the mobile phone out of reach. Tell them to put it in the glove box. My son puts his in the trunk. He came up with that. I didn't come up with that. I tried to call him. I didn't know he was driving, but I was trying to call him one day. It took me 2 hours to get a hold of him. He said, I was driving. I said, didn't you hear the phone ring? He said, no, the phone's in the trunk. It's like, why? He goes, well, that's what I do. Yeah. All right? You got to get them to understand you don't eat or drink anything while you're driving. Okay? These are just some things to have them thinking about. Keeping your eyes on the road when other people are in the car talking to them. Don't turn and go, well, what do you mean by that? As they're driving 60 miles an hour. Okay, so that's all ADHD, kind of anxiety kids. Let's talk a little bit about the spectrum disorder, autism spectrum disorder. There's a good description of what the disorder is all about. It's a neurological and developmental disorder. Used to be also called Asperger's. When you're on the high functioning end of autism, they just said, oh, he's not autistic, he's got Asperger's. Well, that's, again, all under one big umbrella now. Okay, the exact cause isn't known. Here's kind of a graphic description of the disorder. I don't know that I really agree with all of this, knowing the kid that I know, but who we're dealing with is on the far left side. Okay, these are very high-functioning autistic teens at this point, individuals at this point. But they still have difficulty switching activities, some problem with social interactions, inflexibility of behavior. That's a great phrase, okay? Again, here's some prevalence. See the rise in autistic diagnoses. The average autistic individual still has an IQ over 85. So it's not, an intelligent level deficiency in a lot of cases. Symptoms and signs of being on the spectrum are long here. Okay, I'm not going to try to read all of these out for you, but you can see where some of these will affect how successful they're going to be in the school. So those of you that teach classroom, you kind of recognize some of these. A student with ASD really kind of falls into three categories. You got the blurter, you got a shy one, and you got an anxious one. Okay, the blurter is the guy that's got an opinion on every sentence you say and wants to interject on everything you say, even if they agree with you or not. But especially if they don't agree with you, they want you to know that they know something different. Okay, how you kind of fix that or how you deal with that, you got to have patience. You just really got to have patience. You can't roll your eyes at them. You can't call them out on something in a negative way that's going to affect the whole attitude of the classroom. You acknowledge their comment, kind of give them a verbal pat on the head. Sounds a little, but try to give them limited time to express that viewpoint and then move on. Say it's an interesting point. Now let's see what somebody else thinks if they keep interrupting over and over again. Let them know if they've gone off the rail on some topic and they want to talk about the 96 Reds baseball season. The autistic guy I know is a huge baseball fan and can give you stats that, well before his parents were alive, much less he was alive. If you disagree, let them know nicely and be able to move on. Look, it just seems like we're not going to agree on that one, but we got a lot of ground to cover. Let's just move on, okay? See if you can get them to hold their comments to the end of the session. And by that point, maybe they forget, or maybe you can get everybody else out and get them driving, and then you can just kind of deal with them one-on-one. If they keep talking to somebody else during class, like, JR's been doing all morning, you just go over and you stand next to them. You don't have to say anything to them. You just make your presence known, and it has a tendency to kind of cut them off. Talk to the student and the parent on a break. If the parent is there, which usually they are, but again, sometimes they don't want any special treatment prior to this. Talk to them. Ask the parent, okay, obviously we're struggling a little bit in class. Can you give me any hints on how we can control this better? Okay. You got a shy student. Keep making eye contact. You should be looking around the room constantly at every student anyway. Okay, but if you see somebody that you're looking at them and they immediately look away or look down or something, typically you've got an introvert there, and you got to deal with them a little bit differently. If you can get a contribution in the classroom out of them, maybe go a little more overboard on the compliments on that one after you've recognized that they're the introvert. Okay, but be very careful calling them out directly. I had a situation that I had this gorgeous little girl that was sitting on the very edge of the seats all by herself, and I would look at her as I was talking, and she'd immediately look away. And we got talking about something, and there was a couple comments back and forth. We were volleying, and they all had name tags in that school. And Sally was sitting there, and I said, well, Sally, what do you think? You would have thought I'd ask her to get up and take her shirt off or something. I mean, she just had this sheer panic face on and just kind of, and I recognized that I did something very wrong, and I said, hey, don't worry about it, and kind of turned my back and just went on, and then went over and apologized to her. And I mean, she was the most introverted person I'd ever seen. So be careful, okay? And then the anxious ones, okay? And this is really kind of where that kid with needing to get on the exercise bike can kind of come in. They're wanting to get out of the classroom. They don't want to sit in there. They don't want to sit inside. They don't want to sit in a chair. They just want to keep moving. They want to get back out and drive. Why can't I just go drive? Why can't I do this? Okay? It's hard to get them engaged without distracting everybody else, because usually it's in a detrimental way. So you got to keep making contact with them, checking in with them, keep smiling at them, even though they're pissing you off in the classroom. You know, just try to be the friendly face for them on that one. So back in general terms of the disorder, they're going to have any kind of physical touch, and I was showing this to somebody before I presented it. You know, any kind of physical touch, just a pat on the back or a touch on the arm may be unwelcome. We got to be careful doing that anyway, okay? But think about, you know, an autistic student will really react negatively a lot of times if you're just trying to pat them on the back going, hey, great job out there. They have trouble regulating emotions. They have trouble staying focused on one topic. And they might say the same repetitive thing kind of over and over and over again, all right? So if you've got a student that is known to you with accommodations, if you can get that identified and contact the parent before, try to figure out a plan for the day, what's going to be a successful day. I don't think they're in the room. Had a coach come to me one time, actually a registrar come to me one time that knew a student was coming to the school. They had a coach that had some relationships with a autistic relative. He knew how to handle this. He said, hey, I can take the guy. So they were working out a rapport. It was a struggle. They had to pull off course a couple times, but everything was going great. They broke for lunch. The coach was going to go sit and eat lunch with the guy and talk to him, and he said, no, I'd rather sit by myself for a little while. It's a little much for me. So they did that. Then the coach went away, and then when he came back to start driving again, the guy left. Okay? Now, he was 19, maybe 20, so he had a pretty good grip on how he knew he was going to be able to handle the day. They had talked to the parent. The parent said, he really doesn't want me to come, so I'm not going to come. So the coach was a little panicked. The registrar called the parent just to be sure that the guy got home okay. And, you know, the parent said, yeah, everything was fine. He had enough. And he was done. So, you know, obviously we invited him to come back the next time that they came and all of that kind of stuff. But every case is going to be a little different. So you really got to be flexible. You really got to be empathetic to the cause here. So if you can talk to that person and or their parent, ask about the classroom environment. Some of them are very susceptible to bright lights. They don't like bright lights. They don't like noise. They don't like, foods. Sometimes foods can set them off, or they have very restrictive diets. The in-car coach, should it be a woman? Should it be a guy? That's pretty basic, but sometimes that matters, all right? No, he doesn't listen to men. If you've got a woman, he'd really rather have a woman in the car. You know, it can be sometimes as basic as that. The instructor should ask about any other type of unique need. Keep them trying to look for the big picture of what the success really is. It might just be, hey, he just needs to be comfortable behind the car at speed and braking. I'm not worried about a skid pad. I'm not worried about so-and-so. He just doesn't understand the braking thing very well. If that's a success for them, work with them within that framework. So, a few other things with ASD individuals, they can struggle with motor coordination and planning. They're going to have a lot of trouble reading body language from the coach, from the classroom person, from other students, but also body language from other cars. And I think you understand what I mean by that. You can kind of tell what a car is doing before they turn their turn signal on in a lot of ways. They're not going to see that at all. So if it's areas where you've got cars coming close together with each other, just in transport, going back and forth, don't assume that he understands, oh, that car's starting to turn this way. You got to get ahead of them on that. It's very easy for them to become overstimulated. Okay, so if you start seeing them doing a lot of ticking, which could be just something as simple as that, or moving their hands really quick, or any kind of head movements, all that, that's overstimulated, and they need to kind of separate themselves away from everything else that's going on. Okay, so back again, principle belief. If you're going to share the road with this guy or girl, you really want them trained as well as they can be. So if they can legally drive, we should be able to teach them how to do it better. Okay, so I really want to thank Dr. Sith on this one. There's some information on her that you'll be able to contact her directly later when you get the rebroadcast of this if you want to, or feel free, obviously, to reach out to me. Okay? So, anybody got any questions? It's a lot of information to be thrown at you, I understand. Yes, ma'am.
In regards to the special needs and diet or anything like that, we thought about putting that on MSR, because I know I've had people seem to think that I need to be responsible for their allergies and everything else.
We've talked about adding that as a registrar question, and I think it's time. So I'll try to get that up on everybody's page. Now that I know that I can go to Brian and go, Brian, can you add this in there in a blank way rather than the 85 sandboxes or something we've got right now? Whenever we have to add something, we have to go into each one of your sandboxes individually to do that. I'm ADHD enough that takes a lot of time, and I don't ever get it finished. So.
Yeah, we were going to comment that. That would just.
My ADHD or the diet?
Start on ADHD, but just special diet, gluten-free is just.
Vegetarian.
Vegetarian, gluten-free. We have a couple of instructors that always show up, and we were always forgetting that they were.
The instructors, not the students.
We had both, but we do have a couple of instructors.
So make sure that we have a gluten-free option.
We talk about a reason to fire an instructor. Sorry. John, you had a question.
Does the DMV have any unique licensing requirements for people with these symptoms?
That's a really good question. I know in the state of Kentucky, I would be very surprised. Knowing how little it takes to get a driver's license, you can fog a mirror, you can get your permit. So,
not necessarily in Pennsylvania that I'm aware of. However, at least in Pennsylvania, if someone's child is autistic, Pennsylvania State provides a certain number of hours of a coach available to the student, paid by the state. So, for example, how many here have had an autistic student in? Impressive. Yeah, we've had one in Philly region. This student, the parents contacted me ahead of time. They were very involved in this student's life, obviously. And so I like to think about contacting the parents to discuss what capabilities the student may have. And it also is very important to find out if they've had in-car instruction before. Because now that means that they're a little bit more experienced with what might go on in the street survival event.
That's a good point.
I had one where the mom didn't say anything.
Yeah.
It was one of Bill's, I worked with Bill in this school in Bowling Green. And I am a cheerleader in surprise, as an in-car coach. I'm go, yes, good job, And so I'm being my normal self. And this kid was, all he could do to not push himself through the window. And I went to the mom after the first exercise, and I'm like, okay, there's something going on. I'm not doing something right. She looked at me like, well, he's autistic, shouldn't you know? And I was like, oh, no, but thank you for letting me. And I had to completely change everything, like, calm. Don't raise your voice. I had to do it. And finally, by like 2 in the afternoon, he was sitting up in the driver's seat and starting to interact with me. So.
And as a registrar, if you've got a coach that has some exposure in this, has a little bit of training, has a little whatever, keep that guy in mind and keep that guy happy. Have him keep coming back, because the situation where you don't know, and all of a sudden you've got this, individual here that you're like, holy crap. You got to be able to make the switch and pull that guy out of the normal car and put him in with the special needs. Yeah, we had a question back here.
So I do tire rack too, but I'm also a high performance driving instructor at driving tracks, and sometimes people don't tell us. It happens more often than you think. And often people get in the car and then somebody's got, tics or whatever. It really bugs the other instructors, and they say they're not listening. They don't. I've hopped in the car with multiple people who, right when I got in the car, I knew what was going on. And so training people to be able to recognize what that is, and what it looks like is really important, because oftentimes they're not going to want to tell you.
Right.
Because they think that they might not get the same treatment.
Right. Okay.
Well, just first off, we answered your question, having an autistic student before. Fortunately, I had an instructor with training in autism. That student came back a second time and brought one of his autistic friends with him, which was great. But one of the things that we found is they are very rule-oriented. Yeah. Both in expecting to know what the rules are, and even things like a car jumping ahead in line, waiting to go, will bother them. But as long as you're very clear about what the rules are today, and compare them to what the rules are out on the road, because realistically, we're more than bending some of the normal road rules out there. That's why we're out there doing it. And it's like, okay, today is the day that we're going to do these things that you don't normally do out on the street.
Good point. Yes, ma'am.
Bill, in that regard too, I think not only you can find that coach, as you say, you keep them, but try to educate all of your other coaches and your people on the course and everything, because I know I had an incident this last event that, some of my course workers weren't aware of the situation. So if you know that's coming up, I'm just giving you advice that I didn't think about. And I didn't think about advising all of my people.
Let your other coaches know.
Let the other coaches know and let your course workers know that there isn't a problem, that this
That's a good point.
Car, the Mustang is going to maybe pull off to the side and there's not a problem.
In Bill's fantasy world, where we get to do everything we want to do for this program, part of the coach's training will have continuing education. And this will be a module in the continuing education part, or we go on and get it added into the regular coach's training. So at least at this level, you get somebody that's thinking about, okay, well, yeah, they can drive. They can drive just like us, and we need to be able to teach them better and all that. Anybody else? Well, I appreciate it.
Might it be useful, and I haven't thought this through, might it be useful to have a parent of a special needs kid sit in the car to observe the kid and see if they're reaching some point?
That would be an interesting conversation to have with the parent. I can play devil's advocate and go, that's the last thing they might want at the same time. It could be comforting, it could be a distraction. I don't know, but yeah, that could work. I could see where that could work. Okay?
Well, and like I say, talk to the parent. Ask them, are there certain things that will trigger, or what's the best way to interact with Joe or whatever?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, they've been dealing with the kid for 16 or 17 years. They probably have a pretty good idea.
Well, all right. Thank you all very much.